Good morning, everyone. Just get set up here. So, we are going to start the day off with some very light slides, and that is very much a joke because we have about 100 slides or so with charts, graphs. We're going to be getting into boosted trees, logistic regressions, and all the stuff you want to get into after a late night out in Vegas. Sorry about that, but that's what we're doing today. So, what is our agenda? Do a quick little introduction. We will go over some results from recent website studies that Future Partners has done. When I go through that, you're going to have to imagine me wearing a bow tie and being a little bit shorter, playing David Wrightback, who wasn't able to join us today. We're going to talk about how this study was born. So basically, this is the third year of this session, sort of the culmination of a bunch of GA4 master classes. We're going to go through intercept surveys, then we're going to go through follow-up surveys, we're going to go through how we tied all of this together, and then the finality of this where we actually look at how we apply a numerical value to a key event that's happening on your website. Finally, if that's not enough, we're going to look at some different options for how we can move this forward, whether that be IBQML or BigQuery machine learning, or looking at throwing away Google Analytics 4 altogether because it's a pain in the butt to deal with. And then finally, I'm going to have my colleague Jamie Fiedler come up here and talk a little bit about Hotjar and heat mapping software to kind of take this one level further. So, quickly intro, I'm Lawry, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Insights at Miles Partnership. Going on, I think my 15th year in travel marketing, 14th year at Miles Partnership. My background's in full stack LAMP development. I basically work as like the CTO of Miles Partnership. And my hobby is collecting hobbies. I was talking to someone last night and they basically were like, what are you gonna talk about this year? Infrared light guns. Apparently, you can't play duck hunt on modern TVs, so I've gotten very into trying to figure out how to play duck hunt on a modern television. It's a lot harder than you would think because modern televisions don't actually have the ability to use a light gun, and I want to play duck hunt with my kid, so that's my current hobby, trying to figure that out. I mentioned Jamie Fiedler, who's going to be talking about Hotjar, and then finally, there's a cast of people that aren't here today that have been a big part of this. So Jason over at SimpleView, a Granicus company, has been a big piece of this. David Wrightback with Future Partners has helped put this all together. And then Paul McLeod, who's actually working at a sister company of ours, Agenuity now, really kind of tied this all together. Normally I get to split this long presentation up between all three of them, but today it's mostly me. So hopefully we do this well together. So let's talk a little bit about what we know about website users and how we basically analyze them today outside of this study. So just get a general base of what we know. So in a recent study that Future Partners did, what we found is that about 1 in 3 travelers surveyed used at least one official destination resource in the past year, and websites top that list at 21%. It means that we are reaching about 33% of the audience of travelers, which is a good percentage, but it also means that we have about 65% of that addressable market that we can still address. So how do we kind of continue to do that? And then finally, like, ultimately, we see a lot of usage. We will continue to see that usage, but how do we get more of it, right? So basically touching 1 in 3 travelers with the destination website or some destination product at this point. So that website usage basically will go up and down. It basically hovers around 20%, but it does spike with seasonal trip planning peaks, and it's something that we can plan our campaigns accordingly, either to boost in off-season or take advantage of those. We're also not seeing a decline in the last year. Like, that's one thing, and we're not seeing a decline with international data either, so that's good. Print guides trail, but are also very steady, and physical assets basically still matter. That trending band is what we wanted to kind of continue to see. Continue to see that stable throughout all of these surveys. So when we ask users or consumers what their expectations are and around travel and spend, DMO site users, those that have visited a destination website, so that 33% we just talked about, are about 70% more likely than non-DMO website users to say that they'll travel more. So that's an increase from the 23% that you see in the gray chart to the 40%. And it's about that same delta on spend more. So travel more, spend more. This is basically saying that those that visit a destination website are more likely to spend more and visit more, meaning that you are having an impact, right? So when we ask, is now a good time to spend money on travel? Over half of DMO site users feel now is a good time to spend, which is double the non-user rate. And when we look at the average plan budget, it's about $5,800 for a DMO website user versus the $4,000 of a non-DMO website user. So about a 40% uplift, which basically is saying that that destination website is sort of reducing that confidence gap, meaning that they're more likely to spend and they have less issues with that spending. When we look at lodging types and preferences, right? We asked people in the past 12 months, which type of paid lodging have you stayed in? The thing that's really interesting here is that we see a big increase on the luxury and full service, especially luxury. So those luxury and full service hotels lead for both group, but that luxury definitely skews a lot more. And what we see is that the peer-to-peer, like Airbnb, Vrbo, are sort of sitting in the middle, not really doing what they used to do. And so it's interesting to see that the DMO visitor is actually more keen towards a luxury property. So because I have a lot of charts in here, what I wanted to do is sort of have little breaks. I don't know why this keeps going in and out, but basically because we have a lot of deluge, you're going to see a few of these throughout the presentation, just sort of fun news that's happened this year. So Yukai Engineering unveiled the Nekojita Fufu, which is a small robotic cat within the last month that attaches to cups and bowls, blowing air to cool down hot food and drinks. So this adorable gadget mimics human action of blowing on hot items. We'll have a few more of these just to sort of keep it light throughout this, but sort of a fun little thing, right? Now, back into data. So when we look at what the top travel motivators are, relaxation wins across the board, right? So ensure homepage imagery evokes calm, not hustle. Site users tend to over-index on escaping stress, self-care, perfect for wellness itineraries. And there's basically a large area that we can look at with the blue to sort of where the DMO user is over-indexing. When we look at top travel deterrents, both groups rank too expensive as number one, but weather and safety concern rise among site users. They seem less likely to be impacted by budget, but more likely to be impacted by things around safety concerns or around weather. So this is a really good opportunity to really highlight those things that they can do to mitigate either safety concern or what the weather is going to be like. Could be live weather widgets or getting around safely tips is something that could really help here, right? So finally, this is sort of all of the initial stuff. I'm going to be able to take my bow tie off and not be David after this, hopefully. And so basically what we see is that DMO website users from this last study are more excited for travel. They're actively planning within the last week. They take more trips. Shopping and dining is extremely important. They do more activities and destination. They spend more on lodging, and they feel more optimistic about their finances. So just a little bit of a primer to where things are, right? So now we're going to get more into this study in general. So we've been working on this for about 1,200 days now. 3 years ago, we did a GA4 masterclass. That GA4 masterclass talked about how we actually put a dollar amount on a key event within GA4, something that was mandatory at the time. Sorry. All right, there we go. I think we just, all right, we're up there, but not down there. All right, fine, I can do this. There's screens changing what I'm seeing, so just work with me for 1 second. Now we're seeing that over there. I can still work off of my screen, but I'm not sure about you guys, so let me see. Yes, there's a lot of stuff over here. 1 second. Always fun to present, right? All right, we are back up, at least on my screens. See what we get on your guys' screen. All right, I think we are back up all around. Thank you, team. All right, so like I was mentioning, we did a GA4 masterclass. Apparently not. Maybe this is the spot I shouldn't step. I'm going to stay back over here. So basically did a GA4 masterclass when GA4 was just coming out the year before. And in that, we talked about how we were going to group similar conversions together, similar key events, so that we could ultimately run this study. And this is where this was built. And so we put together this big, long list of what those key events were going to be, whether that be guide orders, partner referrals, and created a unified schema, something that Simple View, we talked to MMGY about doing as well, so that we ultimately had a way of putting stuff together across destinations, because GA4 is a lot like Adobe Analytics, where everything has to be customized. There was no standard event category, action, and label. You had to name everything itself, define the different custom dimensions, the different custom metrics, and we wanted to have that unified schema. And so that was the origin of this. So how do we put a value to those? And so we took quite a long time to try to figure out how we tie all of these things together. But this was sort of the origin for that. And what we wanted to do was understand the types of website content that were most influential in the decision to travel to the destination and or increase the length of stay. And we wanted to determine the indicators of actual visitation to the destination after using the website, because we were seeing what people were doing on the website, we were seeing what people were telling us was important to them, but we couldn't tie those two things together. And so we kind of had to take people's words for it, or look at the metrics separately. And so the idea was to link those two things together by using both an intercept survey and a website follow-up survey. The intercept surveys looked at the reasons for visiting, what they told us, the point in the travel planning process they were in, and then they basically opted in, hopefully, for a follow-up survey. And in that follow-up survey, we wanted to look at the actual travel behavior. Did they actually visit after they said they were going to visit? What kind of lodging did they pick? What were their travel motivations, and what most influenced their decision from a content perspective or an event perspective? To do this, we designed a study. We had basically 10 standardized questions. We had a follow-up of 20 questions, basically trying to make it as standardized as possible, because we had a lot of destinations basically being part of this, right? We had pop-up modals that kind of looked like this, whether that be on mobile or desktop, and then the idea was that we had a big follow-up of the website users that we could present, and then break that down by desktop and mobile users, or basically potential trip planners. But the thing that was unique was ultimately how we tied this to Google Analytics. So how did we used a tool called Informizely, bring that into GA4 and actually look at what they were doing. So all that said and done, we had 37 different participating destinations, right? So big thing, we had both states, regions, cities. There were a lot of different types of destinations that participated, so we weren't skewed in one specific way or another. And so what we ended up doing was this summer, we ran the survey from July 19th to October 4th. In that, we had about 40,000, 38,000 responses across those 37 websites. And then the data was weighted by the volume of sessions each DMO website received over the same time frame to try to even that out, right? Then in the follow-up survey, we opted out those who were emailed from the survey, and then we did a follow-up survey from November 4th to December 13th, where we had approximately 500 surveys responded to. And that's sort of how we put together where we're going to go next, right? So what did we find from the user intercept surveys, these polite digital ambushes, basically? So these are statistics from both Miles websites and Simple View websites, and they're segmented by types of DMO. So of those that said they were gathering trip information, we see the breakdown by the different types of DMOs. So that 51% were gathering information, and what we saw was that basically the regions and states were dominating sort of like where people were getting that inspiration up at the top, right? So a much higher level and then went a little bit down. So that was one of the first things that we thought was fairly interesting, right? Then where were they at from a point in the travel planning process? So we saw that 46% of users said the site would influence their choice, which is a pretty big thing. And then states show the highest influence rate of about 57% here. So basically looking at the bar that has the blue shading over into the bar on the right? So those that could be influenced, they're not decided, they're not other or journalists, they're interested or considering, which equates to about 46%. And of those 46%, we're breaking them down by what type of destination. So starting to see a little bit of where things are going, right? So then we looked at this by website users on desktop and mobile. So one of the interesting things that sort of was counterintuitive to what we always thought is that mobile used to be a much higher in the funnel thing, right? Someone would sit on the couch, they'd look around, try to figure out where they wanted to go on vacation, but ultimately do the booking, make the decision on a desktop computer. That sort of changed in this, and what we're seeing is that mobile skews slightly more decided now than it did in the past. So people are actually making the decision or researching things after being decided on their mobile phone, and it's a little bit less about inspiration. So this gives us an ability to potentially change CTAs from mobile to desktop. There's lots of different things that we could do with this sort of data, right? So when we asked what sort of content, which type of content you are looking for on this website, select all that apply. We saw that things to do and attractions came up to the top, then events and festivals, restaurants and dining. So things to do and attractions were definitely the thing that they were looking to do most often. When we look at those content types broken down by device type, we see that events spike on mobile, likely by this weekend type searches, and so it's really a much bigger thing. But we still see things to do and attractions extremely high, but that variation between mobile on events is very interesting. One thing that we also thought was interesting was that video content is a little bit lower. I think you see video content sort of weaved throughout a lot of different areas, but it was interesting how low that was, especially with the higher production value. So, data break for a second. Keurig, the company that makes soy sauce, also is now introducing an electric spoon to enhance the saltiness without extra sodium. Use a mild electrical current to amplify the salty and umami flavors in low sodium foods. Interesting, we'll also be mentioning an analytics product later in this presentation that happens to be called umami. So very relative here. So when we go to the different types of content, which types of content you are looking for on this website, and we break it down by those who are visitors, so not in market, versus locals, we find that locals hunt events at 50%, while visitors chase attractions at 63%. So different types of content matter from where someone is going to come, and we'll look at this a lot more once we get into some more of those breakdowns. Top content types. So when we look at whether or not someone is decided, interested, or considering, we see that hotels and lodging play a much bigger role when they're interested or considering, much less. Same with deals and events. Those that are interested in, those who have already decided tend to skew higher on restaurants and dining type content, which is something to note there. So when we look at it broken down by age range, so boomers, Gen X, millennial, Gen Z, boomers tend to be higher on things like blogs, things that are a little bit more things to do in attractions, where millennials and Gen Z tend to over-index on deals, which is also another interesting sort of thing to take out of this. So that was sort of what we've produced to date, right? So these general things, not too groundbreaking, nothing like amazingly revelating there, but fairly interesting, right? So then we did that follow-up survey. And here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. I still think the follow-up section to this is where it's a lot more interesting, but still pretty interesting here, right? So we surveyed, we went back, and what we saw was over half of the website users visited the destination, about 58%. Of those visitors, over 1/3 traveled to a destination 2 or more times. So what we saw was that the average visitor took about 3 trips, which seems a lot higher, basically after visiting one of these destination websites. So interesting for a lifetime value of a visitor type metric. When we look at those who said, since visiting our website, and have you visited, and they answered yes, we look at what content they said influenced them and what they actually looked at. Restaurants and dining. This one seems interesting because In the past, it's one of those things that we like to say that it doesn't actually determine where they're going to visit. It's something that there's just an expectation to. But we saw this to be where they really sort of found that inspiration, right? This has been one of those types of things that since they visited, they're very much interested in that restaurant and dining content, articles and blogs, but restaurant and dining sort of over-indexed here a lot more. So that inspirational food content goes a long way. And then the number of trips, so those who spent more time not on the restaurant and dining content, those who spent more time on things like hotels and lodging actually ended up staying and are coming more times, so influencing the amount of times they came. So most website users who visited the destination said the website helped them make their decision. That's about 66%. And so when we asked what the importance of the website in making that decision was, and of those that said that it did help them make the decision, they said it was either at 22% very important and at 50% very important. So combine those two things together, we're at about 73% of an importance level for whether or not it helped them make their decision. So this influence is not exactly attribution, but it is interesting to see from a correlative perspective sort of how that influenced, how much influence the website actually has. So, do you feel that our website helped you make your decision to visit the destination? So what type of content do we think actually influenced the most, right? And so here what we saw was that visitor signups actually top the influence, so visitor guide and newsletter signups. Sort of that old school tactic, we always wonder how much it influences. Traditionally, we like to say that those that sign up for a newsletter or sign up for the guide in particular have already decided to come. So this one is a little bit antithetical to the sort of popular belief in this area. So something that is definitely worth noting, definitely would like to do a little bit more here. Deals and articles, still important. Videos and social, trail down at the bottom. And so thinking through like how we basically prioritize that on the site and how we actually look at the remarketing sort of pairing with that is an interesting piece as well. So over a quarter of website users who visited the destination said the website increased the number of days spent. About 27% of people said that, right? And then the additional days spent in destination we can see over on the side, and about the average at 1.9 days. So basically those who said the website influenced that influence led to an extra 1 to 2 days in the destination, which actually is a real economic impact that we can look at here. All of this stuff is building, I promise. I feel like I'm just doing a lot of slides. There's something here, I've got to sort of set the stage, right? So website users who visited the destination stayed on average 6.2 days and 5.7 nights in market, much more than those that you would typically see. Something we may want to look at are specific adding a day itineraries. So someone that may already have been decided or is looking, how can we give them what they can do in one more extra day? This has always been an idea that I really liked. It helps actually see how influential the website is and provide some economic impact data to say we saw this many people see this type of content, ultimately resulting in an extra day in market and extra return on investment. Quick break. I don't know if any of you saw this, I think not last week, but the week before, a bunch of hackers actually hacked the crosswalks in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, and it played the voices of Musk and Zuckerberg, letting them know basically how they feel about AI and what they're doing in this space. So this is not the first municipality type hack, but it was definitely one of the more interesting ones that came up in the last week or so. All right. Website users who visited the destination reported that the website most influenced them to visit a restaurant, 60%, and or an attraction at 56% in the market. So restaurant and attraction choice most influenced, and lodging influenced the least. So what's interesting is that this tells a story that people are going somewhere else for lodging, right? They're going somewhere else for lodging reviews, lodging prices, because most destination websites don't offer that. And where they're really getting that inspiration is around the dining content and attraction content that is harder to find in other places. So this is really where the destination site can do the most to sort of influence a visitor, because we don't tend to have all the data that we need on specific lodging types and things of that nature. Most website users who visit the destination stayed overnight in a hotel, motel, or inn in the destination. Basically 55% stayed in market hotels and only 4% day trips, which dispels the myth that there's usually only drive markets. So this was something that was nice to see. And then an overwhelming majority of website visitors are less likely to recommend the destination website to others planning to the destination. So 86% would recommend the website, which is a very high NPS score if you wanted to look at it that way. All right. We are now going to get into the meat of the presentation. It is this spot. I need to not walk over there. All right, we'll stay over here. I'm a pacer, so I naturally wanted to go over there, right? So tying it all together, this is where we on our team basically looked at built some statistical models and tried to basically tie the things that were happening on the website to action and then put dollars around to it. This is a nice AI-generated images that reminded me of an old Adobe commercial where a baby kept trying to buy encyclopedias on his parents' phone, and then they like spun up a whole thing where they were trying to basically run more encyclopedias, where basically you never really know what someone says in a survey or what they click online, so you kind of have to tie those two things together to actually know what's happening, because both things can tell their own divergent stories. So, just because it's my section that I feel more comfortable in doesn't mean there aren't any charts. So this is basically a big chart that looks at the reason someone said they were going to visit and then the types of actions they took on the website. And what we can see is there's a notable variation in all conversion metrics between reasons that the users are on the site, and they make sense, right? Visitors and residents refer to partners the most. Planners and journalists click out to partner businesses the least. Tour planners and visitors order guides the most. Also virtual guides for tour planners. Planners sign up for emails the most, visitors more than residents, but not that much more. Visitors spend the most time on site by some distance, while residents have a very low time on site, which makes sense because they're also the most likely to click out to a partner business. All metrics are pretty high for survey respondents compared to those of normal site visitors, which is sort of a disclaimer that they were taking a survey, so they were already much more engaged. So we kind of have to take some of this with a grain of salt, but this is sort of what we are seeing, right? And so how do we look at these key events per user type, right? So among potential visitors, so those who said at the top were in the trip planning process, there were basic variations in their conversions, and these also make sense. Those who were those only considering convert less overall than those who've already determined. And when they do, it's usually to order a guide. Those interested look like those who are considering, but they're more willing to sign up for the email. So those who are interested are more likely to sign up for the email than those that are considering. Decided travelers do everything more, but especially referring out to partner businesses. This is sort of in difference to what we always thought, right? We always thought that those who come to the site had already decided tend to order a guide. What we're seeing is that when someone actually tells us what they're doing or what they said they did on a survey, when those two things are separate, we get different results. And when we combine them, we actually see that they may not know or remember exactly what they were doing on the site. Those already in the destination refer out the most, and they ask for guides the least. Makes sense. All potential visitors convert more and spend more time on site than non-visitors. That suggests our sites do engage their target audience when they get to them. How does this break down by age? Age also mediates conversions quite a bit. Referrals are much less likely as you move up in age. Guide requests are much more likely though. Younger users actually do look at virtual guides, which I found hard to believe. I've never understood them, if I'm being honest. Time on site significantly higher for older users. Makes sense, it's hard for them to find stuff. But this also tracks with referral patterns. Email signups, most notably stable among all groups. Other dimensions also display differences. Sites perform very differently from each other, devices versus operating systems, traffic mediums. Paid social is notably very low engagement and conversions across the board. So, looking at what we had, how do we model these different user types from the key events? So here we're going to go into a little bit of theory, probably my favorite section of this presentation. So what does the data say? What users say brought them versus what they actually do. This is what we're trying to figure out. And so which key events are associated with different types? And so what we did was we grouped the different types of users into 3 main categories. Potential visitors, which are those who are undecided and are still researching. Those that are potential referrals. I have a really hard time with this category because it's also a type of event name, but it makes sense, so we're going to go with it, right? It's those who have already decided that they're going to come, those that are already in market, and residents. So people that are already there, those that have already decided, and people that live there are most likely to have referrals. And then we have professional, whether that be media, travel trade, event planners. And then the insights can basically influence the UX for key events. And in the future, we may want to model how many unsurveyed users we have of each type as well. I'll not get into that for this specific study. So data collection. The responses were tied to key events that we collected within Google Analytics 4, and we extracted all of that data from BigQuery and exported that data. We identified custom tracking signatures of similar key events across sites. We joined all of the GA4 sessions using session IDs, and we also grabbed the engagement time, the devices and the OSs, and where a user was located to sort of put this all together and understand all of those different feature sets. We used only sites that track the same conversion set. So those are partner referrals, physical guide requests, virtual guide views, and email signups. And then we grouped them into age brackets or triads or terciles, if you want to say it in a fancy way, right? Those who are younger than 43, those between the ages of 43 and 59, and those older than 59. And then we removed all paid social users because they had a very low engagement and conversion score, and it kind of threw off the whole model. So there are multiple different types of statistical approaches to look at as you go into this. We looked at 2 primarily, and we evaluated those. The first were boosted trees, which I will explain because it's a little complicated, and logistic regression. Boosted trees are basically decision tree modeling with the regularization built into it. Logistic regression is basically giving a value to each thing. And then we needed to evaluate the mediating effect of several dimensions, age, device, and channel. So today we're all going to learn about boosted trees. So I say we at least learned something today, right? So what is a boosted tree? So imagine a flow chart of like if this, then that, right? If the source is paid, it goes this way. If the user is on a mobile device, go that way. If the time on site is greater than 3 minutes, take another path. Eventually the tree leads to a prediction, did the person convert? And then boosting means we build lots of these flow paths, right? Each one learns from the mistakes of the last one. So, okay, tree 1 tried to predict conversions and got some wrong. Let's build tree number 2 to fix those mistakes, and then tree number 3 builds on that, so on and so on and so on. Probably didn't make a ton of sense, so let's look at a real-world example. So let's say we run a coffee shop and we want to understand boosted trees as it ties to if someone's going to buy coffee. So tree 1 says if it's morning, they'll probably buy I think it's a muffin in this case. But tree 1 missed the part about people who only buy muffins when it's cold out. So the first tree was like, is it morning time? They'll buy a muffin at the coffee shop. But that didn't really work. So then they say, we see most of our muffin purchases when it's cold outside. And then number 3 says, and those who stay in the shop longer are more likely to buy one too. And we basically keep boosting the original tree with the next one based on what it missed. So this is boosting. So you're creating lots of different scenarios and trying to figure out which one of those scenarios is the most likely. Cool? The next is logistic regression. It's like being an odds maker, if you will, right? Where did they come from, what device they were on, how long they stuck around, and then based on the pattern, we'd give them an 8-to-3 odds of converting, right? It's about possibilities as opposed to a specific channel. So I like this example. Let's say you run an online store. I feel like I missed one of my examples here. I missed my example. You run an online store and you want to predict, will this visitor buy something in this session? A logistic regression says more page views, higher chance. Mobile, slightly lower chance. Referral traffic, not a good sign. Email traffic, strong signal. Product added to cart, massive yes, right? So these are the sort of differences. I like on logistic regression as well, sort of an example of like a pizza party. I thought I had a slide on that. Maybe I got it out of order. Oh no, I do have one more. I put it in the wrong place. So this is sort of the difference, right? Boosted trees handles complexity really well. Not that easy to explain, as we just learned, right? It's not fast and simple, and it's really messy in real-world data. Logistic regression does not handle complexity as well because it's more linear, it's more easy to explain, cannot handle weird patterns as much. It's fast and simple, and it has clean probability scoring. So how do we actually figure these out? So we figure which one to use out using what's called a Shapley value. And we use Shapley values to basically create a game theory concept for allocating values to different factors that work together. How does that work? So this is the example I was trying to think, right? So how much did each input actually matter for this prediction? So imagine I'm having a pizza party and I invite over 3 of my friends. And each of us has to bring in an ingredient. So my friend Alice brings the dough, my friend Bob brings the cheese, my friend Charlie brings the pepperoni. I bring the pizza sauce. Now I have to look at each combination. Who did show up, who didn't show up, and figure out how each person changed the outcome, and then average those contributions together. In this case, I would probably guess Charlie is valued the least here because you can still make a pizza without pepperoni, but you pretty much need all of those other things. Maybe Bob with the cheese, I guess you can make a pizza without cheese, but you pretty much have to have the dough or the sauce. So understanding the importance of each one of those values is what we have to do to understand whether or not we're going to be using a boosted tree model here or a logistic regression model here. This is great content for like 9 o'clock in Vegas, for what it's worth. So we run all these models and we basically get like this sort of chart, right? Is that we see that boosted trees produce a little bit better of a score, but it can't identify clear relationships between the inputs and the outputs. And so we ultimately choose a logistic regression because it helps us build an actual causal model. So what they did matters. And so how does this all work? We're going to look at some cool charts. These are Shapley dependence plots, and they basically break down the Shapley values of exogenous variables. So like top potential referrals to partners. Every event is like a positive correlation, which is up on the top. I'll make these easier to see in 1 second. And at the bottom, we see that there's like a strong relationship between print guides and potential visitors, maybe a negative one with visitor guides. And so let's make those a little bit bigger, right? So if we're looking at the top one, is the user is a potential referral to partners, right? What we see here is that the email signups help us identify potential referrals but are not powerfully associated with persuadable visitors. So those who have already decided or live in market, it shows a strong signal that email is something that is a strong correlation to that type of user. But they may, if someone is a potential visitor, we don't see that go up and to the right. See, that value is pretty low. It may still influence, but it's not as high of an influencer as an email signup. So these sort of charts are basically these Shapley dependence charts, help us understand how important each one of those things are. So in this case, if we're looking at users is a potential referral to partner, the virtual guide view up at the top is very well associated with potential referrals. So those are the people that are already decided or is already decided, lives in market, or is already in market, right? And then if we look at it did not actually indicate someone is not a potential visitor. So user as a potential visitor basically goes down. So those that we already know are coming, visitor virtual guide views very well associated with that. If they are a potential visitor, very poorly associated with that. Make sense to some degree? We have a break. So recently there was an AI-powered spice dispenser that came out. So Spicer is an AI-driven spice dispenser that customizes seasoning blends based on user preferences by learning individual taste profiles. It aims to enhance home cooking experience with precise and personalized spice combinations. Not something I ever thought I would see in my lifetime, but yeah, that's a thing now apparently. So back to our programming. All right, identifying user types from key events, right? So basically what we saw is that similar with partner referrals, our referrals therefore, similar with partner referrals, so partner referrals like not the referral to partners, but the actual partner referral event, have a very high association with that type of people, and with potential visitors, a very low. So they're just more associated with decided and in-market users, so someone clicking off to a partner business, more associated with someone that's already in the market or already decided, less associated with someone that has yet to make up their mind, a potential visitor, right? So then we look at this in a different way, which is basically a Shapley summary plot, or a B-swarm, if you will. The red dots indicate a high value of each feature up at the top for potential referral to partners, and then at the bottom. And so what we see here is that these red dots over to the right are basically a higher value, and those below the 0 line are a lower value. So engagement time and print guides are good indicators for both, but much more powerful for potential visitors. Make sense? All right. And then what we found is that age and device affect some rates of conversion, but not visitor models, similar with sort of referral models. So while the age rates and device types basically have a lot of impact on the total number of things, when you actually look at them on a percentage basis, it was pretty much like a non-issue. So how do we take all of this sort of theoretical regression modeling and apply this to our websites? Apply this to how we actually score things. By the way, I really thought ChatGPT 4.0 did a great job trying to take a statistical model in real life and put it in Marfa, Texas. And the text is just amazing in these days. So just very impressed with this picture. So how do we take this and then basically tie it into putting a value on the visitor? So we add the data from our follow-up surveys, whether or not they came to the destination or not, how many times, and then whether the site influenced them. We connect that to their initial surveys, their key events, and we model visitors versus non-visitors from those key events. And what we saw was that basically 7 out of 10 did not visit, so about 30% visited. And so when we look at only potential visitors, people that are in that awareness or interest stage, according to their initial survey answers, the averages reveal important differences when filtering for potential visitors only. There are way more partner referrals, way fewer print guide requests and email signups. There are more virtual guide views, and there's more time on site. So when we start putting this all together, it changes that story a little bit, right? So now we look at our B-swarm plots again, and we basically see that referrals and engagement time are important for predicting both answers. Virtual guides are not due to small sampling. So basically, in the top chart, what we see is that while there's a strong positive association for referrals and engagement time, it makes sense. Guide requests and email signups are negative indicators, which is counterintuitive, and it could be tied to sample size, but just something that we saw. When we look at the number of trips to the destination, we model the number of trips, and the print guides and emails are more of a positive indicator again. Some people with a lot of trips did those things. So, how much is each one worth, right? So we look at 3 different models here. So how much is a key event worth? So building a general key event value model is complicated, and we have to consider referrals, so many are already in market, value is a lead to a business, but then they're also associated with real visitors who report on high influence by the website, right? So value is much greater for an additional visit. So there's several possible approaches. We're gonna look at 3 here, and then I promise we actually have something. I'll have a QR code, you can scan it, you can put it into your website if you want to. So approach 1 is we basically create GA4 audience triggers. So we could say, here's a high likely visitor audience. So basically they have a high engagement time on the site of greater than 2 minutes, or they have 2+ partner referrals, or we could have a high likely planner audience, which is visited a non-leisure section, engagement time greater than 90 seconds. This is really tough to do, and it's gonna be different for every site. It's probably the simplest of approaches when you look at it in the beginning, but then becomes one of the hardest ones to manage. There is a potential here for some like lookalike modeling and things like that, but again, that's kind of hard to do. So we sort of went away from this. However, it's something that we've done in the past. So approach 2. we can apply a predictive model to the event data. So this is a little bit more sophisticated than the simple rules, but it's still sort of doing the same thing. It needs more data and training for accuracy, and it's used to build marketing audiences. I'm going to show you how you can do this. That said, I don't think it works that well, but I'll show you how we do this with Instant BigQuery ML. And then approach 3, this is the one that we went with, right? The idea is that we estimate the proportion of users that completed each key event and use those rates found in our data, and we basically supply real-world value estimates. So a referral from CPC is worth this much, a guide and email is worth this much, destination visit is worth this much, and basically build a sort of matrix and then apply values to those things. And then we weight the values by rates from our survey. So sum it up, and then we basically have an estimated average value per key event, which basically looks like this beautiful chart right here. So we could say like other people that didn't fall into one of our categories up at the top, basically there's 25% of the users that came to site. They're essentially pretty much standard across, like they do about 20% referrals, 20% engaged, don't order 7% order guide. Then we can look at professionals, event planners, travel trade. That's about 3% of our users that they've identified at. Pretty low across the board. Residents here, we can see that it's about 10, 12% of users. The thing they do the most is click out to referrals. Decided visitors is about 27% of the overall traffic. Again, they are very high across the board in the actions that they take, especially virtual guide views at 70%. Potential visitor that did not visit, also pretty high across the board, didn't order a virtual guide, which is an interesting data point, but it is what it is. Potential visitor visited the site and rated the site as moderately important. The thing that stands out there, the referral and the engagement time on site, and sort of down the list, right? And so how do we then value those? So what we did was we ended up building a calculator. And what you can see here is that we take the overall value of what we think a referral is going to be. So in this case, we see $1. What's the value of a planner lead? So contact us. What's the value of an average visit to the actual destination? Did they have a multiplier for did or didn't visit? And then, ultimately, what did they rate the site as moderately important, less important, not important at all? And then basically calculate that out. And what that does is basically tells us how much money to, or what value to associate to each event. So basically $1 per partner referral, and then model that out. And so what we can do here is you can basically scan this QR code or go to that URL, and you can plug in your own data, right? So what you think the click value out to a partner is going to be, what you think the average visit value of someone is going to be, what you think a visitor guide order is worth, right? And you put those values in, what the value of a visit is going to be, how many nights they stayed, and all of those different things, and then basically it calculates out what value you should put in each event, and then the overall value of all the actions taken on your event. So this is definitely something that's very interesting. It's something that you have to sort of put some work into, but you can get a lot out of it. What we're going to be doing next is putting this all together in a white paper that's a little bit more organized than this, because this is literally the first time any of this data is being presented. And we're going to start on our clients applying key event values to destination websites so that we can say the total amount of partner referrals, even though a lot of the residents or people that have already decided to visit have done those things, it's still worth this much as far as a value perspective. Those that order a guide, this is the value to associate with that, so we can start to prioritize that, and then those values actually help from a modeling perspective. And then what we'd love to do is run more studies like this. This has definitely been a long process. I think the seasonality of the study could have impacted some of this, but it's something that we think has a lot more value to it. So that's sort of where this study all went, right? Very much a lot of data. So I figured what we could do is basically look at a couple different things that are not tied to the study, but sort of are aligned with them as sort of a wrap up to my section before Jamie comes out to talk a little bit about Hotjar. So for those still with me, I had two things that I thought were very relevant as I wrapped this study up. The first is, if you love this type of stuff and you want to take it further, we've been playing a lot with Instant BigQuery ML, which is a propensity modeling library. Walk you through a little bit of that. And then on the other side of it, I know a lot of my clients, I know myself, like we're over Google Analytics 4. Like it's just not very fun to work in. There's a lot of GDPR or CCPA or data privacy law issues with it by working with Google and being able to do some of these things. So we're going to talk a little bit about other options and some of the stuff that we're playing around with. So in Instant BigQuery ML, there's a website you can go to if you just Google IBQML or Instant BigQuery ML. Google has a tool called CR Mint, and basically you hook your website up to it, you hook up the data that you have in BigQuery, and it creates propensity scores and audiences. And then ultimately you can use those for remarketing. So we've done this. The website kind of looks like this. You basically say you want to use App Engine or Cloud Run. You say what you want to do, whether it's engagement time, whether it's guide orders, whether it be referrals, and it basically builds a pipeline for you that looks like this, right? It starts to predict. The first stage is that the pipeline runs ML algorithm. The second stage is that the pipeline formats the predictions from BigQuery ML and then prepares it to go back into Google Analytics. And then the third stage is the pipeline sends the scores to GA, and then the pipeline creates the audience segmentation. There's a lot of different model features. You can look at all the different scores and values, but essentially in the end, what you get is something that looks like this, GA4 audiences. And so we're modeling the 3 at the bottom, and while we had, I want to say like 90-something thousand sessions while we were running this, we only had 366 users fall into the high BQML propensity to refer out to a partner, 280 into the medium, and 48 into the low. What's hard about this is that most destinations do not have a lot of return visitors, right? About 60% of traffic is usually coming from mobile device, maybe 60% more of that is from Safari. Those cookies don't last very long. And so when we look at building these propensity models, even though they're running every hour and then updating the audiences every day, pretty much it's a new visitor almost every day. So like it's hard to basically add a propensity score to someone that is visiting the site again because you don't know it's the same person. Also, if they take the action, in this case, creating a referral to a partner, if they've done that, then their propensity goes up to 100 and they're kicked out of the model. But this is something that we can do with this type of thing, and I stepped on this stupid square again. So this is just one option. So this is basically all the cool fancy stuff that everyone says you should do. Doesn't work that great for this type of website is the summary here. But it is something that is not that hard to complete. I want to say it took maybe an hour to set up. There's a lot of linking, and then you end up getting these models, and you can push them out to DV360, Google Ads, and start to look at those sort of propensity scores. The next thing that I want to sort of highlight as another alternative, right? There are lots of different alternatives. Matomo, which used to be Piwik, is one that gets thrown around a lot. One that we're playing around with is a company called Umami Analytics. It's a lightweight analytics alternative where it does not use cookies. It does sort of a fingerprint, stores that and can tie sessions together, but no cookies, so it's fully GDPR compliant. You can either use their cloud solution or you can self-host it. In this case, this is tied to the Miles website. It's been up there not very long, and it's self-hosted on Google Cloud. So we get a nice little dashboard. We're able to look at the top pages visited, the refers on the site. We can break things down by technology. We get all the same geo reports. We get pages, refers, channels, browsers, OSs, devices, countries, regions, cities, languages, screens, events, query parameters, which is basically anything in the URL, hosts, and tags. So a lot of different data, not tied to GA, a lot faster, very reasonably priced. I want to say it costs us like tens of dollars a month to self-host this on GCP using Cloud Run and Docker. But I think their biggest, most expensive plan is like $100 or $200 for them to host it for you. Then we can look at different session reporting, tie that all together, and basically it's a nice overall way of looking at all this data. And so that's sort of how I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to have Jamie Fiedler from our team come up and now talk a little bit about different ways of measuring from a website perspective. So when she's done, I'll come back up, answer questions. I know this was a lot of data this morning, so hopefully this is a little bit more fun, a little bit more tied to user interactions on the site, and less charts and graphs, because if I was in your seat, I would kind of be upset with me right now, because that was a lot of charts and graphs. So, Jamie?
Gray's always a hard act to follow, so bear in mind with me. I'm Jamie. I'm a senior digital product manager at Miles. I have had 6 years with Miles, but I've spent most of my career in software development, either SaaS or custom, and then also building websites. My job is mostly to oversee our digital strategies, so I take a look at what are our goals, what are our KPIs, what is our 5-year plan, and how do we get there with our websites. And if you can't tell by the emojis, I love dogs, metal concerts, cake, and old school video games. So Gray was really speaking a lot about the quality and the depth of the information we can get from vast amounts of data. And so what I want to do today is I want to kind of take it back down to a cellular level as a reminder of why we build these digital experiences in the first place. Because we don't really build them for clicks, we don't really build them for traffic, we build them for people who are real and making real life decisions to come to a destination and make a memory. So let's take a look at a hypothetical. So we have Jordan. Jordan is going to a destination to meet with family and friends, really looking into finding events this weekend. Oh, that's just going through, okay. So they get to your website, they get really excited, looking at plan your trip and your navigation to find events, and nothing. So just like that, we took that initial impression and we made it so that it was confusing, we added friction, we maybe lost Jordan, and that's because the experience wasn't matching the expectations. So this discussion is really about putting real people at the center of destination websites, and we do that with validated data. So user research, behavior analytics, testing, those are all insights into what travelers need, what they want, how they're feeling is really important, because ultimately people don't care about your sitemap. They care about finding the festival, booking the trip, booking the tour, things that they want to stay on. So I'm going to talk about a couple case studies that we've done using behavior insights, like Ray mentioned with Hotjar. We also work with several other platforms to get this kind of data. This one's really great. It was a study that we did to test the existing navigation on a site. The tree testing is a usability method to test if people can find information when you strip away all the visual elements. So if we take away all the pretty stuff and its labels, are they able to find what they need to? So here we asked, where would you go to find upcoming events? And 53% succeeded, which feels good, but that also means nearly half of our participants were lost and didn't know where to go. So we took a look at the data and we were able to identify patterns, and in those patterns we found wrong turns. We found people going to plan your trip, and we found people going to local resources. The actual answer was buried under things to do, which really made sense to the team who was building it, but not to users like Jordan, who didn't quite find it. Another example that I love to talk about is interactive elements. Always look sleek in theory, but don't always hold up in practice. So while we tried to make something that we thought would be very engaging, that would really get people excited, users didn't know how to swipe. We were seeing that the contrast was poor, navigation was clunky, and so we were watching user after user recordings fail. So it looked really modern, it looked really cool, but it was creating friction in the user experience. So we redesigned it. Instead of forcing users to swipe, we gave them something very familiar. We gave them a stacked, mobile, scrollable layout. We cleaned up the hierarchy, we had better contrast, and we made it really easy to use with one hand. And the result of that was that users scrolled intuitively, and taps to the content, to the CTAs, as you can see by those heat map marks, were actually increasing over time. We didn't add new content, we didn't change the content, we simply just got out of the user's way. Another one might be information overload. So this case is really about content density, especially on mobile. We were tracking top landing pages, and we were looking at a very big drop-off in scroll depth, and we were trying to figure out why. Our intros generally have some really good, rich content, both for SEO, but also for the visitor, to give them context in why the destination's great, why they're helpful. But we were seeing that maybe the introduction was too long and the layout was heavy. Our one fix for this was to do a simple button. We truncated the copy and we put a read more button on the page underneath the intro. That simple change increased content interaction by almost 11%. And most importantly, it didn't hurt SEO. So all the work that we did with our content team, with our analytics team, was still delivering what we were looking for. We didn't lose anything. It just gave the users more breathing room. This is also my favorite study to cite ever because this button is probably the top 3 elements on a page, on any page that it's on. So it is like tried and true across like beaches pages, things to do pages, Little Havana. This one constantly gets the engagement, which says that the content's good and the experience is good. Carousels. Carousels are good and bad for all sorts of reasons. But when they're not implemented with care, they really work against what people are actually naturally doing to interact with them. So in this case, we were watching a lot of recordings and seeing that users were getting confused and swiping didn't behave as expected. So it was very quick for those users to give up on that component and move to another part of the page or to give up entirely. So we redesigned that. We focused on one thing, which was predictability. So we just standardized the scroll experience. We made sure that the arrows were on the bottom, so as you're poking the arrows, you're seeing the cards move. And that carousel ended up becoming one of the more popular pieces of the pages where those were taking place. So that's really what happens when you tie functionality with flow. And my last one, I promise, is finally let's talk about interrupted experiences. So we had a webcam page. On the left-hand side, you can see the old one. That was filled with real-time stunning views of the destination. It's one of the most viewed pages on the site. But the bottom half were all the other locations that you could go to. And 75% of the users never got past roll 3. It wasn't because people weren't interested, but if you can see, they don't know to go back to the top to look at the main box. So what we were seeing is that we really needed to change how that layout worked, and that's where carousel actually came in to save the day. So we included pagination, and we included subtle cues like indicators and content to indicate more content was available, and we adapted the layout to fit the screen a little bit better. So most users here were going deeper into the page. Again, you can see these are heat maps, so all of the darker or the lighter pieces indicate either less touch or more touch. We were able to track that. And really we learned from that the infinite scroll isn't always inclusive. It's really important that sometimes users have permission to pause. So these case studies started with research, but not just any research. Research that's fast and focused and most importantly human. We evolved how we tested our insights, and honestly it really comes down to empathy. So making sure that we are understanding who our users are, what they need, and how we provide them what aligns with our business goals without losing any of that nuance. So better websites start with better questions, essentially. AI was covered yesterday very well, and AI is just one more tool in our toolkit when it comes to research. There's all sorts of different things that have been out there for us to use and try, but I think the important thing here is that it doesn't replace humans. It allows us to listen better. The goal isn't just speed and clarity. Clarity is what allows us to make the data decision determinations and to move forward. This is where it gets powerful. I also like to say that AI isn't just speeding up our analysis, it's helping us see what's hard to quantify. So for example, I was confused but kept going. This made me smile. I couldn't find it, so I gave up. These are emotional signals that the user's sending to us, and AI helps us surface them across hundreds or thousands of users, and we get patterns from that. So we're not just seeing what's wrong, what's a defect, what's an issue on the site. We're seeing how people are feeling when they're getting to the site. Lastly, I would just mention something that we like to say a lot, which is good design is invisible and great design is intuitive, but the best design is kind. And the way that you get there is from understanding your users and working towards how your business objectives work within the users that are coming and visiting with you. And that's it.
All right, with that, questions, anyone? Or do we all want to break early? Happy to answer anything, or Jamie, answer anything? Thank you for doing that, by the way. Anyone? I've just got Eddie right there, one right there. I don't mind if you ask. I don't know if someone's going to run to you with a mic, though. Wrapped up a little bit early. You can yell it and I can repeat it. Yep. How's it going? Because if I made that, the question was basically in the age segmentation, there were 3 triads, 43 and under, 43 to 59, and then 59 and greater. If I was to break it up more, there wouldn't be enough people in each segment because it's just older skewing survey. So basically to try to get this ages, the sizes to have enough statistical significance and not make it too small because there's only, 5 people that are under the age of 25 on the site or something like that, that also answered a survey. So it's basically based on statistical size and need to have somewhat of a decent size in each one of those areas. Make sense? Anyone?
Yeah. Hey, Gray.
Hey, Eddie.
Morning. So, one thing that I was thinking about is it's still really a tough question to evaluate, what value should be placed on, different actions. And obviously, you guys have conducted a very large quantitative study, and you're also studying, user behaviors across the website and monitoring those and seeing kind of, what they're doing. But I wonder if a qualitative study to accompany the quantitative one, where it's really just a conversation with 30 to 50 people about what they found really valuable on the website, would help inform and maybe evaluate certain things a little bit differently. For instance, what if it's the content that someone's digesting on the website rather than a specific action like newsletter or something like that, and then that means that scroll depth or a different action actually has a lot more value than we previously thought, as part of the study.
Yeah, so there were parts with surveys that are qualitative. They weren't so much conversations as survey follow-ups because we had to basically make the data universal across all the different sites, but there was the initial intercept study that was a survey-based, and then the follow-up survey, again, where we asked those questions. The final piece of it, tying it to the events, the idea was to try to actually take what people said and then tie them to the actions, because when you do the qualitative, people say this may or may not have influenced, but then they never actually took that action. They just thought they did because of the delay in it happening. So what we're trying to do is actually take those things and normalize them based on what they actually did and not just what they said they did. So there was a combination there. The bigger challenge is when you look at a specific type of content, when we were talking about 37 different websites, right? The categorization of content was harder to wrap up than events, and the initial goal of the study was to provide a estimated value number to those events, because in the beginning, GA4 required you to actually associate a value with a key event. You don't have to do that association anymore, but in the beginning of when GA4 was rolled out, and there's been a lot of changes, you had to associate a value. And so we wanted to be able to have a logical way of saying what that value should be, rather than just making it up, which is where we were at the time. That requirement's not there anymore, but that's where the study was going. I do agree, I think content is important. If we were to continue this, what I would look to do is actually add tags on all of the sites for the type of content viewed to try to organize that in a way that would allow us to pull that data. But because you're looking at more free-form URL paths and things aren't categorized and one piece of content can be tagged to multiple different types of things, it was hard to aggregate that across all 37 sites that participated and do that from a content type perspective. And so you did see on the slides, and sorry if I didn't call this out, that these are not typically the types of slides I always present, so it's not my forte, if you will, that we did have it by types of content, whether that be hotel and lodging, restaurant stuff. That was both not just listings, but editorial content as well. And it was based on what they said influenced them. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit for you. You're good.
Yeah, and let's talk more about the umami thing. That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's something that we've had 2 California clients recently sued under like a 1960s California wiretapping law that basically doesn't have a cure period like a traditional GDPR or CCPA. And so basically the idea that I'm transferring an IP address or some piece of identifiable information to say Meta, X, TikTok, is they're trying to basically say that it's wiretapping under this 1963 law. And so we have a lot of California clients that were in a sort of mode where when you click a cookie banner, right, it's there, but unless you block all of your analytics from the time that the site is rendered, and you don't fire your Google Analytics, you don't fire any of your pixels, you're violating a lot of those CCPA laws that require explicit consent because you've loaded pixels before you got the consent. And so when you turn on that explicit consent, you lose like 60% of the overall visitation to your site. And so we usually set these in permissive mode because no one likes to lose 60% of their overall traffic, right? And so while most of the laws have cure periods, there were a few cases in California that were filed under this 1963 wiretapping law that won. And since then, they've basically all been losing. But we got a bunch of class action lawsuits. And so it kind of pushed us to say, is there a better version of analytics? Because no one really likes GA4 anyway. There's all these things that are packed in that we can run, that we still get the data that we need, but we aren't tied into the Google ecosystem. And we don't even have to have a cookie banner if we don't want it, if we're not having third-party pixels, because there is no cookie being set. And so we're looking very heavily at doing that with Umami or some of the other types of tools. Sorry. Anyone else? Or are we done? Right here. Hit with mics on both sides.
Hi, I feel like I understood about 60% of that, so
That's
I'll
good.
feel good about it, you know?
Yeah.
Did you look at possibly using, looking at tying key events to like marketing attribution tools that use the location data? So like, you know, like a tourism economics or Datafy or Zartico or something? Like, would there be any value to like looking at like actual visits?
Well, the people told us they visited when we followed up with them. So like the first study on the Intercept said like, what are you decided, undecided, are you considering, are you interested, do you live, right? And then that said that they were not yet decided. So those that were interested in a trip or considering got a follow-up survey, and we asked them whether or not they visited. And that's how we got the end piece of data that basically said they did visit, they spent this amount, they stayed in this type of lodging. And so they basically told us they visited. That was the way of tying those two things together.
Got it. So basically what you were doing was taking that data from the survey and then like not assuming that all website visitors have the same behavior as the people that took the survey and just looked at their behavior and then tried to figure out what caused what.
So, all right, the slides probably didn't do the best job here because this is a pretty complex topic, right? So the initial thing on 37 websites, there's a survey, right? The survey comes up and says like, do you mind telling us a little bit about your session today? What is it that you're trying to do? Like, I've already decided to visit. I'm planning a potential trip. I'm considering coming, but are yet undecided, and they classify themselves. I'm a journalist. I'm media. They answer a few more questions, how old they are, what their email is, a few more things, right? I think there was 10 questions. Then, for those that had said they were not decided, but were considering or interested in a trip, so that percentage that fit into there, they gave us their email addresses for a follow-up. Then we set them a follow-up survey and asked the question, so you told us between July and October that you were interested in coming. Did you actually come? So they told us whether or not they came, how much money they spent, what type of hotels they were in, what sort of travel they were looking at, all those sorts of things, right? Then that was sort of the first data set was the blue data, like that was the intercept survey. Then there was the orange data, which is like what they told us, right? They said, yes, they were interested, they came, this is some interesting data about that. The final data set said, okay, these people said that they came, we have their email addresses, we also have their email address hashed in Google Analytics. So they said all of these things mattered. Let's actually see what they did. And so that's where we take those events and say whether or not the people that said that they were interested and then said they were going to visit, what did they actually do, and then give those a score and a value so that we can apply those as a percentage to all visitors on the site. So let's say they said that the website had a high potential of influencing their visit. So of those, maybe that's 0.1% of traffic. Maybe those that said it had a medium amount of influencing them. Let's say that's, let's say it's 1% of traffic. And those that had low likely, that's 2% of traffic. So we take the overall total amount of people that came, we then take a percentage of that said that they were open to influencing on a total, and then we apply a value to that type of event, and then that's how we start to score the overall values of the totality of those events that occurred. And so those are the values that you would plug into that calculator.
But you're still assuming that the people that took the survey are strictly representative of all web visitors.
And I did make a note about that,
Yeah.
that they're more engaged than most. But there'd be no way to do that with a sort of location data set because we don't have their email addresses. We can't
Sure.
ask them those questions. And in all likelihood, it's very hard to you can use that data on a large level, but down at an individual user level, it's kind of hard to get that type of data out of it. Anyone else? Or we break? I think we're good, but I also have a lot of lights in my face, so I'm just going to say we're good. All right, thank you, everyone.